My guest for this next installment of Logseq Legends is Bas Merge. I'm trying to say his name in the correct Dutch way there, but most of you will know him as ToolsonTech. On his channel, Bas looks at how you can use Logseq, Todoist, Notion, amongst other tools to simplify your workflows and just be more productive. And also encourages one to work with yourself and not against yourself. His sign-off is always, "You're awesome," and I really appreciate that. Bas is a DevOps engineer and he works in the banking sector, so he knows a lot about how the enterprise environment works and what the restrictions are for different software. For instance, he doesn't use Notion in those environments because of the GDPR regulations, but he's managed to get Logseq into his working environments. And in this session, he's going to share with us some of the things that he's thought about in bringing that to reality. Bas is also running a workshop for people who are looking to bring Logseq into an enterprise environment, so a professional context really, and that workshop is available in the link below. So, as always, I've added a number of timestamps to this discussion. It was free-flowing and broad-ranging. It's more of a podcast-type conversation. There's no sharing of screens. It's more discussing principles and ideas. And I decided not to edit out the beginning chit-chat just because it's nice to flow into the conversation and it feels more natural. I hope you enjoy the discussion. My intention is to sort of to shoot the breeze, sort of to shoot about talk about Logseq Enterprise, but also to just see where we go. I'm really not attached to any outcome.
That sounds good. Yeah, the biggest trick always is in the end to make it into a coherent story. I had that with the session here with Ramses as well, because I think we had 3 hours of footage in the end or something. It was ridiculous.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But he was here the whole day, right? So we had plenty of time to shoot the breeze and we we're constantly recording. And of course it became this long video, but to really condense it, you have to figure some way to tell people where what is.
Yeah. But that was, you filmed that last year, surely, hey? Or was it this year? My impression was it was last year and that you only released it this year because there was something around ChatGPT, or there was something which made me think that you only did it last year and then released it this year. But I can't remember.
That was this year, I think.
Was it
when I
this year?
released it was
Okay.
2 weeks after we recorded it. And I really had to hustle a bit because I had to find time to do it, because there wasn't that much work to clean it up, because it's not like an edit where you have to cut out half of it and figure out okay, what's the core message. Most people, at least the people that I heard, mostly wanted to say hey, I want the full thing because I just want to listen to it in the background. It's more podcasty than actual video creation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Because I listened to the full thing. I'm glad you didn't edit it out. It was a good conversation, and you guys also have a good rapport. I don't know if I watched some of it and then I listened to it the rest of it whilst I was around the house, and it was a good background to what's going on with Logseq. Because I think even just reading through Ed's blog, there's a lot of confusion as to what's happening, what are people doing, and I think Ramses has got a very difficult job in the sense that he's managing a community who've got a lot of this open source expectation of but this is how FOSS should work. But then balancing the development needs, the fact that the team does things a little bit differently.
He's herding cats.
Yeah.
I've talked with him. That's the main problem that you have is when you have a group of engineers, definitely the original Logseq crew. They're good at what they're doing, but they haven't been doing it in a professional matter. So they hired a couple of professionals, and those people start coming with weird requests hey, I want testing in this software, and I want a release plan and things like that. And the original developers are more free form. They were used to building what they wanted to use, and now they have to build a company. That means that you have to let go of this free form thing. You can't just build willy-nilly. You have to start thinking about your broader customer base, and those two things clash. I mean, it would clash on my side as well. If somebody starts telling me how I should run ToolsonTech, then I would also go hey, sure, maybe, but not right now.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting balance though, because I see the need for bringing in order and a little bit of structure and testing and the fact that things aren't buggy, and especially when you need to build a company, you need to take, well, you don't need to, I mean, but the typical model is taking venture fundraising and then using that to build your team to build the features. It's not like just like a hobbyist project. Because I think that's it. I still don't understand like the dynamics of like open source software, how like companies that don't take venture capital can make it work in the long term. I mean, if Logseq was only charging us like whatever $10 a month, like I don't think it would be enough to pay the full team like a decent salary. So it's like you have to
Yeah, well,
give
that's like
away
one of the
freedom somewhere.
questions I asked that I don't have an answer to yet, because I was going like, okay, you have like venture capital, that's nice, but what does the person that gives all this money want back from it? Like, is he planning to sell Logseq at some point to Google, something like that?
Yeah.
That, of course, partially worries me, but the thing that takes that worry completely away is the fact that Logseq has one of the broadest open source licenses that you can get, which means anybody could just fork it and make a new version if a big company would buy Logseq.
So I don't understand enough about that, like, and like specifically in the enterprise context. Maybe let's like use that as a segue, because I've seen that there's like discussion on the forum about AGPL versus like a GPL, and Logseq has AGPL, which is super liberal, and like you said, a company could literally like build their own Logseq and market it tomorrow. And could they sell that though, or like what's the
that's like a misconception that I see a lot in the open source debate. You can 100% sell open source. That's like not a big issue. The problem is that you have to release the source code, and the AGPL is built specifically for the problem that we started to see where you have web applications. So the original GPL that was there meant like, hey, if you change the software, the code, you have to release the source code again. So it's like a virus. It basically infects a program, and that program can only be used in other open source projects. That's by design. The original GPL dude, Richard Stallman, was fed up with the fact that he didn't get the source code for his printer. So that's where it came from. And AGPL basically takes that one step further and says, like, even if you modify the code and not distribute it, but you use it to do a web service, you just send it through web browser, then you also have to release the code. So it's basically a protection for the modern day of living where we do everything by web browsers. So yes, somebody could take Logseq and build its own spin on it and then sell that or sell services on top of that. But the core, the application that they have, any change that they make, they would have to re-release as open source code, and people could do the same for that. So it could just branch off into multiple versions. And I think one of the prime examples in the open source community we've seen there was OpenOffice, that at some point got taken over by Sun, I believe. It's been a while. And then because people didn't like that direction it was going, they forked it into LibreOffice, and all the basically volunteers at some point started moving towards LibreOffice, and then you got like the open source version as the core again. That's something that could happen with something like Logseq if their company ambitions become too strict and somebody says like, I'm going to build my own Logseq and move away from it.
Do you think it's like feasible for that to happen? Because the development team, I've heard from people that the code is messy and like difficult to get into, and that like it's really only the development team that would be able to pick it up. Because I mean, I imagine like even coming into a company where you're picking up a project, like it takes so much time to onboard, like, oh, what is like the documentation, where are the slides that I need to read to get this thing? Like, is it actually feasible that someone could come in, pick it up, create a fork that is going to be better than the original Logseq?
I wouldn't say better. It depends very much on the size of the project. So if the project as Logseq gets bigger over time, there's more professionals coming in. You'll have different layers in that. You have the like we, for example, we do promotion. We help people along. We do tutorials. We get people into the system. But you also have like a lot of developers. You see those building plugins because they use Logseq every day, and they go like, hey, I want to tweak this to my will, and I have this skill, so I will add software to it. If the project as it is now grows big enough, then it can very easily happen because you just need like a couple of people that go like, I'm willing to pull this to do that. But it doesn't happen that often because it's a huge commitment that you take. The moment you say like, hey, I'm going to go start pulling this wagon, that means that a lot of people are suddenly dependent on you, and the level and scale that Logseq is at, that's a day job. That's like full-time working to keep it going. So you need someone that's very fanatical, that has the time, that's willing to draw the things together, and preferably a small team of those people, because Logseq is pretty big. So it usually doesn't happen willy-nilly. It would happen because Logseq as a company would make mistakes. You have to do really big mistakes. I don't think Logseq will do that, because take Ramses, for example, he is in tune with the community. So if a mistake at that magnitude would be made, then I'm pretty sure Logseq would correct. They would course correct. They would listen to their end users, because they are not a Fortune 500 company that goes like, we don't care about their users. No, they care very much about the users. They just suddenly have a lot of them.
And has there ever been like, I mean, in this LibreOffice example, is that the case, that a small group of dedicated people then took over, and or is there a precursor to this, and who funded them then? Like,
yeah, it's free time, and so it's a passion thing that it starts with. But that said, if it usually is, there's like a small term, like it goes into like, oh, we're gonna have this, and then you have like these two things standing side by side. And very quickly, as in over the time span of a couple of years, you usually find out which of the two is the winner overall, and then suddenly you see everyone flock towards the winner and say like, okay, let's all build on this one because this one's going faster. So that's nature for you. I mean, people aren't as committed as they sometimes say they are. They would say like, hey, I'm just going with whatever works best. And with software, that's pretty easy. I'm always glad that it happens though, because I don't want 5 different versions of OpenOffice. I want one version that is free to use and easily accessible. The one thing that I do see in a lot of open source projects that I always worry about is at some point it gets a bit stale. At some point it's good enough. And that means that the developers that use it go like, oh, this is good enough. So they fix bugs, but they won't make any major changes. And I think that's one of the great things about the funding that Logseq got, because they have funding, they have to make due on that. They have to explain why everyone can use Logseq. They have to take that step back and actually look at, okay, how can we make this mass appeal for everyone? I'm not sure if WordPress ever got that funding, but I do know that WordPress made that step. It used to be a lot harder to use, and then at some point they got in a UX designer and they started working on it, and they revamped their backend. And as an end result, it became more user-friendly. And because it became more user-friendly, it became at some point the most known blogging platform in the world that you can host yourself, and take an exception of like things that are hosted, like Medium and other platforms.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I know that Matt Mullenweg, he started WordPress.com and Automatic, which is like they built like the plugins for WordPress or whatever, and like, but he was one of the benevolent dictators of WordPress.org. But like he's made tons of money, but I don't know about you, but I haven't got like people streaming in to like buy coffees via my like buy me a coffee page or whatever. Like, I think people like, if they can take something for free, they'll take it for free, like before they pay for it. So it's such an interesting, like the incentives don't always align, and it's like only a small group of people who like are funding anything really. Like, that's weird.
That is true. It's also what I see Logseq doing, right? One of the things that they're working on now is like the working together. And you already see that a lot of high-end professionals, like engineers that grew to management positions in large companies, start using Logseq because they like it's open source, and they need a place to keep their notes. So Logseq is filling a gap that is hard to fill by something like Roam or Notion or a lot of the other SaaS solutions. Actually, like I'm looking at the enterprise side of it. The reason I can use Logseq inside most enterprises is because everything stays local. There's no data going outside the company I'm at. And that's very important, because the moment the data of that company leaves the company premise to be stored at some SaaS solution, that's a hard cut. That's the moment I get told, no, you can't use that. But when I go like, it's just text markdown files on my encrypted laptop, backed up by the company, then suddenly it becomes a lot less of a hot issue. Then they go like, okay, it's all within the company. So then, that you take your notes, they don't care. They see it as a glorified notepad or ultra edit, which is good because, you know, in a way, Logseq is that. It's like Notepad, but then on steroids, because it does blocks and it does referencing and linking. And suddenly I know information from 3 weeks ago because somebody talks about a project. Magic powers, but it's still in the backend just Markdown and text files.
Yeah. So it's more about the local storage. It's not going to like some server that is, I don't know, in the GDPR regulations, it has to be in Europe, I think it is, or like, it can't go to an American server.
If I use something like Sync, then an enterprise wants to know where it's stored, and within Europe, if it has any personal data in it, then definitely it needs to be on a Europe server. You're not allowed to send that outside Europe, and then preferably encrypted.
So you can't. Well, what are the implications for using Sync in enterprise then?
To me, currently it's no, and that's because the Sync part is partially closed source, because that's a service that Logseq provides and not part of the Logseq core software. I can build my own Sync service, for example. So if you want that in an enterprise environment, then Logseq first has to prove that they run all the regulations, that they follow the GDPR, that there's been an audit inside their business. That's a lot of work and not something that Logseq is currently focusing on. They're focusing on making the application the best it can be. Luckily, because its backend is just text, in enterprises you can still sync, but then we usually sync, I would say the old-fashioned way, because I'm working with engineers, by putting it in a GitHub repository and syncing stuff up and down. And I know that Logseq internally did something similar in the beginning when they didn't have anything set up to do that yet, where you just had to, like, you know, get a copy from Git, make your changes there, push it, and if there's any merge conflicts, deal with it, because it's like code. And that works. I mean, I've been using it in a very moderate way in enterprise setting, but in practice, usually what we now do, the couple of people that I have that work with Logseq at my current project, we just send the Markdown files up and down. So if I make meeting notes, like my coworkers know I'm excessive on that one, go like, is Bas making notes? Excellent. Just send me the Markdown afterwards, and they just chuck it in their Logseq and then go like, it's fine.
Okay.
But
I mean, that was one of the questions. I'll get to that, like the collaboration part of it later. But like, okay, so that makes sense then, that you can still use GitHub, or instead of using Logseq Sync, you're using GitHub. And GitHub, I mean, I want to dumb it down so that if I'm thinking about the question, I'm sure other people are thinking about the question. GitHub has obviously met all those GDPR regulations. They've got European servers. You can do all that sort of stuff. You can configure it. Okay.
Yeah, GitHub is part of Microsoft. Microsoft, of course, is a global company. And the reason I mentioned GitHub, because you can have different places to put your Git code, is that most companies that I get in Europe, at least on my level, run the Microsoft suite. I haven't met a company. I've met companies that use Google Apps, but I haven't worked at companies that have Google Apps, for example. Though Google does the exact same regulations. It's not a small player in that field by a long shot. But that means that I get the Microsoft suite if I come in. So I get Outlook, I get Word, I get PowerPoint, I get GitHub. You know, usually Azure, DevOps. Microsoft did really impressive work.
I've been using VS Code recently. Well, exclusively of late. Like VS Code, I've finally learned how to use GitHub, because I'm using Hugo with Netlify to or Netlify, I don't know how you say it, to like host my websites, and like doing everything from Markdown file using GitHub. Like it syncs automatically. Like it's quite something. But I think that a lot of people, I speak from experience here, are hesitant to use GitHub because when it clicks, but like that whole idea of like git add dot, git commit message, this is the latest update, git push origin master, like that's all I do nowadays. And like, but that was a big hurdle to like overcome, where I was like actually understanding what's happening, like how I like get this thing to the remote server, like adding a remote server. Like it's the easiest thing in the world when you've got it right. But like when you don't know, like it was such a big hurdle for me. And I followed I don't know if you follow the channel fireship.io or fireship.io. It's a flippin' amazing channel, and like he's got like these $10 courses, like, and the one was on Git. And I was like, I've watched your channel enough, I'm buying your $10 course. And I watched like the first 10 videos, and I was like, easy, I don't need to watch any more. Like, this is amazing. Like it works. And Yeah, but I think like it's a major barrier, and I can see how one could do that in a team environment using it. Like you don't need Logseq collab sync or
No,
like real-time collaboration. You could theoretically all have the same Logseq graph that you are syncing up to and then syncing down from, or pushing to and
yeah.
pulling from, if that's the correct language, I think.
Yeah, you could make a graph and then sync it, and then of course the main issue that you hit is the journal, because everybody wants to write on their own journal page. So that would be tricky, but the rest, like the pages, that would merge pretty well as a knowledge base setup. And this is also where like the file management limitations of Logseq come in a bit, because I tried at some point to say like, hey, I make a subdirectory in pages and I put that one in Git.
Yeah.
But because when I make a new page, I can't say like, put it in that subdirectory. It's very hard to make pages that I want in the shared and the local environment. I would have to pre-make the file in the shared directory then. So it would work, but it would be very clunky. And as a result, I couldn't make a video about it, because if I can't even like get the workflow straight on my end, I can't explain it to the rest of the world. So for me, just make a separate graph.
Separate graphs. Okay, so there's no way of like creating separate folders. I don't know enough about how Logseq works in the journal pages. Like, but you say Dario journal, Bas journal, whoever, Ramsey's journal, and then like to get all those working. Like, surely there should be something in the config file, because that feels like a simple thing where like Obsidian, you can have folders and put specific contents in folders. I feel like that would be a workaround that would enable teams.
That's like a function that I would miss. If I could specify what my journal directory was in Logseq, then that would be easy, right? Because then I can say like Logseq/Dario, Logseq/Bas, and then we would have like both our own journal pages. And then the only thing that becomes then is that we know that all our nodes aren't private anymore, so we would have to be like a little bit more careful about what we put in there.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the ideal scenario, and the fact that I know they're working on real-time collaboration, because let me take a step back and then see, thinking about like using it in a team environment. When I started using Logseq, I was like, everyone should use this, and I want everyone in the company to use it. And it wasn't going to work. Like, even like in the first demos that I was doing for people, I was like, this is how we can configure this. Everyone is like, no, it's just too complicated. And when you make that jump to the outliner way of working, to the journal, to the links and stuff, it unlocks a lot of value. But until that point, it's just like this huge mountain to climb. And for that reason, we didn't ever adopt it in a collaborative model. So the way that I was trying to do it was in a Google Drive folder that everyone had access to, and that everyone would have their own page that they would add information to, which is not the best practice, because ideally you want to put that stuff in the journal, but like to avoid the conflicts, that was the way that things would be working. We didn't ever get further than that because no one was using it, and everyone was like, oh, I've got my own way of managing tasks and stuff. And I think that's fair. But how are you doing it in your team settings? I know you're sharing markdown files or whatever, but like just I don't know if you can speak to the different challenges and workflows.
Well, I think that the challenge that you name is like, getting everybody to use something like Logseq is hard to nearly impossible, because everybody has their own way, their way of working systems, and Logseq is a very specific way of working. So what I've noticed in my setup is that I mostly start using it for myself, and then people start going and asking questions at some point, and go like, why do you know all this? Why do you have links suddenly out of nowhere? Why do you know that there was an approval 3 weeks ago that was in one obscure email that came by 5 seconds? And I go like, oh, because I put it in Logseq. And I work with engineers, and engineers really like technology that just works, and they're used to writing code. So they're already half attuned to Logseq. And then I saw that like coworkers of mine said like, I'm going to give that a go. I'm just going to spin it. Can I install that? I said like, yes, you can install it. You just can't use any of the online functions because those get blocked because company regulations. But I also know how to manually install plugins. I just have to manually download them and maintain them. I can't use the marketplace in an enterprise environment. And I still try to avoid as much.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just like my sync wouldn't work, because it just goes like, I don't know this application. It's not allowed on the internet. So by default.
Okay, I want to put like I'm going to write some notes, but carry on because like that feels crazy for me, anyways.
Yeah, but that's like what you get when you get like in closed off corporate environments. So then other people start using it, and then you start swapping notes, and then slowly but surely you get to a point where you go like, hey, it would be nice if we could just automatically swap notes. But I don't think we're there yet, mostly because there's already a barrier to entry there. Like people have to learn Logseq. If you add the barrier to it, then you have to do specific jumps through hoops to share information. Basically, the whole thing crumbles in from there. I know that Logseq is working on being able to work together because they know it's a strong request from the community. I know that they've been testing it, but it's a hard problem to solve because it's a local application. You know, web applications is easy. Everybody connects to the web application and people communicate back over the same web application. So there's one central point. No such thing with Logseq, right? Logseq, everybody has their own instance. So how do you exchange information becomes a hard problem. I hope they solve it, and I hope that they solve it by not having a central server on the internet, but allowing me to do a local server. I mean, I see a very profitable future where enterprises ask me to set up a central Logseq server, because that's a technical thing. I can do that. And companies don't care about how much it costs, right? If I'm doing a workshop, I want to make it affordable because I want people to be able to just go like join the workshop and not make it impossible. But when we're talking about installing an enterprise server, that's bank. That's good stuff.
Okay, so just to set the scene a little bit more, if a company were to adopt this sort of thing, so if a company were to adopt a Notion has to have gone through all those loops of the security compliance things, whatever, which is why I know that you said that some banks that you've worked with don't like Notion, as in not don't like it, they don't accept the usage of Notion on premises. Okay, so they don't accept the use of Notion, and something like Tana or no, wait.
They all run into the exact same problem. Tana has the same problem. Obsidian doesn't because it's local.
But
Obsidian Sync
surely
does.
they've got like, it's more in a company or like these companies are getting the necessary ticks. So like I know Fibery and Notion have got ticks, but it's companies that are still saying, oh, but because you're not on a Microsoft suite, we're going to say no. Like,
No, that's like, I was super happy when Notion opened their office in Dublin, I believe, because they said like, okay, now this is the first step. You need to have an office in Europe before European companies can say like, okay, this is GDPR requirements are met. And then the second one is that they have to specify that if I log into it as a European user, that all my data is stored in a European data center. There's a lot of these regulations that you have to comply to, which as a normal end user you don't think about, but they're there.
Wow. And how do you feel about Microsoft Loop? Have you tried Microsoft Loop?
I haven't had the chance to try it yet. Of course, I looked at the demo and I had a video I talked about like saying like, okay, is this copying Notion? I mostly saw it draw things together. I'm super curious though. Unfortunately, in most projects like this is like a pre-feature and an enterprise that will take a year before they even get to a point where they have a small beta group that tries it out. I need to test it on my own system, but I've been busy because I'm trying to turn my YouTube channel into something that actually makes me some money. While having a job. So I told a lot of my friends, like I have 2 jobs right now. So like 4 days of work doing project work, 2 days of work working on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, I've got a lot of admiration. Because I think I was in the same position when was it 2021, and like it's a lot of things to juggle, and you're still putting out content like probably more regularly than me, I think. And
I try to aim at once a week, but it sometimes becomes twice a week. And if I had a holiday, like I was on winter holiday a while back, and then I miss a couple of weeks because I don't work ahead. I'm not good with working ahead. I tried. It's just
it's too much to think about. But yeah, so to speak to the monetization thing, you're running like another thing, like looking to monetize or whatever, but like you're running this workshop. What does this workshop entail? Like, I mean, if you think about this as like a marketing opportunity, which you can by all means use it as, like, shoot the lights out.
Yeah, so I needed to figure out like a way to give value and start earning some money to it. And one of the things that I think is definitely less suitable for YouTube, but more suitable in a more short environment, is how to deal with Logseq in a corporate environment. I have lots of experience with that now because I work in large enterprises where you get limited left and right. And I thought, hey, if I turn that into a workshop, I can give people like a fast track. We can take like a 1.5 hour. I'm going to keep it low on the amount of people. I'm aiming at around 5 in a normal session so that you can actually have questions, do back and forth, talk shop a little bit without immediately being worried that it goes out to the whole world. And I've been outlining like what kind of topics do we talk about. So we talk things like the approval process, which is one of the big ones. Because using Logseq in a lot of companies means that it has to go through an approval process. It's a bit of a catch-22 because if I come into a company as a freelancer and I work there for 2 years and I need a year to get it through the approval process, which isn't an uncommon amount of time, that means that I miss the first year of notes, making it nearly pointless, because the moment I get in is when I open Logseq and start making notes about the company. So there's always this gray area I'm stuck in where I'm using Logseq, but it's not official yet. And then I also talk about things like, hey, there's a lot of things that you can do to avoid getting into hot water for doing this. So don't put any customer data in it. Absolutely not. Like that's the biggest red flag you can have. Don't start syncing. Try to use as less plugins as possible because each plugin is a liability because it's software. Don't use the latest version of Logseq, like use one a week ago so that it's a bit more stable. These are all small things that when you use an enterprise set, enterprises are risk averse. So as long as you did like your due diligence there, you're pretty much on the safe side. I mean, then if people go like, yeah, it's not approved, but you go like, yeah, but at least I didn't send any of our data outside and I'm not putting any data in there. That's actually a problem. It's mostly my own thoughts and how things are related to each other, then it's less of an issue. And those things I put like in a workshop because like, okay, those are things I had to figure out when I was starting to use Logseq on the workflow. Like, what can I do? What can't I do? What gets me, I wouldn't say in trouble per se, but what would be hard to explain if people would go like, hey, why didn't this go to the approval process? Logseq isn't a hard program approval wise because you don't pay licensing fees. It's open source. Those are usually good things these days. That didn't used to be the case. When I started, having open source was like a red flag. Like, no, we don't get that stuff in. But that's also a bit how open source started at the company, right? Because they had like all these Windows servers and then one Linux machine started sneaking in. And then the second one started sneaking in and then, hey, why is this thing performing so well? And then suddenly everybody was using Linux. So this feels a bit like that. It's like the same thing over again. And then of course there's
Trojan horse.
It's a bit of a Trojan horse, except this one comes with gifts instead of like people trying to kill you. And then we have to also the workflow is a bit different. Like if I'm doing creative workflow, I'm going to fetch information, process stuff and collect that. While when I'm working at a job, I just get this stream of things blasted at me and then like meeting notes, emails, chat messages, people talking at the coffee machine, regulations, documentation. And you need to be able to capture that into Logseq in such a way that it pops back up. And I'm currently planning a video that I want to talk about why I think search is horrible. It's like your last resort in Logseq, because I'm going like, if once you pick search, that's like you the rest of your systems weren't right. Like things should have popped up organically.
That's so interesting. Okay, I mean, because I like the search actually. I
mean, search is fine, right? But it also means that your system, like, it's the discoverability is lower because you're specifically searching for something.
I think I'm maybe using search in a different context where like I have the node as the page and then I use the filters. Like, so for instance, if I when I was building this Hugo site, I'd tag everything with Hugo and then images. I don't put that on like a Hugo page underneath like an outline images. I just tag it in my journal and I say hashtag Hugo, hashtag images. And then later on when I want to go find out how to put images in Hugo, because I forget this sort of stuff.
That's filtering, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you're searching because you're going like, yeah, I think it was called X and you're going through your system, then that's the one I'm going to go like, okay, that's your last resort. If you reach that point, then you didn't capture something well because it wasn't linked to like your project or a person or something that is part of your system.
Yes, got you.
And I think that's where the power of Logseq lies. Like a while back, I had that one there where they're talking about like, hey, is project X approved? And the first thing I do then is I'm in my Logseq, of course. I open the page for project X. I look at the notes under it, and sure and behold, like 2 notes down, it says like that in that session, approval for project X. And within 2 seconds, I can say like, okay, we got an approval. And those things are valuable in business. But if you don't have the right system, like it happens now, but it didn't happen in the first half year when I was using Logseq, because the systems I didn't know what to capture and where to put it.
And I think there's an important thing which a lot of people like struggle with, which is the balance between like putting too much information with no structure and like putting far too little information or too much structure. I probably said that wrong. Yeah. Anyways, too much structure, too little structure, too much information, too little information. And I think like, you've got that thing now, which is like, project approved. Like there's some sort of, I think of it like, I try to think like everything on Kanban stacks. Like how do I manage these things through different stacks? So yeah, but developing a taxonomy for that and an approach for that, developing that for an individual is hard enough. Like I feel like I've cracked it to some degree myself, but like for a company, I mean, because the problem is like there's like Trello, even Trello gives you like some sort of structure, but you still have to name those things and get everyone to work in it. But like getting that adoption across the company, I don't know, how do you plan to do that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things where Logseq is like awesome, and that's abbreviations. Like if you've ever been in a large company, they have like 3-letter acronyms for everything. If they don't get away with 2, it's like, and I think like half my Logseq pages is just 3-letter acronyms, and then in it has like an alias with like the full name of it. So that's like an easy one, right? That's something that if you have like a shared Logseq database in this case, and just being able to just go like open a bracket, type in the abbreviation, hover your mouse over it, and go like, oh yeah, that's that and that project, and it's related to that, and that team is. I think the other thing that's very important is the ability to merge notes. So people are messy. I'm messy. Like if I make my notes, over time, I will have 3 or 4 notes about the same topic, at least. Because I'm making notes, I'm opening a bracket, I start with a different sentence, and voila, there's an extra note. But over time, then I start discovering that those notes are there. And then what you need to be able to do is to, without too much hassle, combine those notes and keep the original context. So I use the merge plugin a lot because then I can say like, okay, take this note, take that note, combine them and make aliases for them. Because
that's interesting. I've never heard of that plugin. I just rename the pages. That's like the way that I approach. Like if I
that's what I sometimes do.
Okay.
But the merge plugin, I didn't thought like initially when I saw the plugin, I thought like, why do I need this? Because I can just rename the page and then successful, I rename everything and it becomes like one thing. But then I discovered that the reason why I want the alias is because I typed the name wrong once, I'll type it wrong again in the future. So by having the alias, next time when I type it the wrong way in this case, it will still pop up and I go like, oh yeah, right, it's that name. And then I'll start self-correcting over time.
Yeah, I must say, in this webinar that I hosted, someone asked the question about aliases. So I went into the deep dive, and aliases are nice, but they're not super functional in the sense that like they're not working across queries and stuff yet, which is
that's like, true. They have like a lot of limitations.
It feels like a big gap. I want to get back to some of the questions that I was jotting down. Like when you were chatting.
Do you have 2 minutes that I can get some water? Because
of course,
get water before the session.
Of course, perfect.
I'll be right back.
I mean, I must say, and this part I want to go live again. I really appreciate like the fact that your content is so applicable because you're working in a professional context. Like I often feel like there's this like recursive productivity loop where it's like productivity content for the sake of making productivity content. So I appreciate that you and Danny as well. I think because Danny works in like a research context, there's a lot of like applicability in it. So yeah, and your positive attitude. Like I enjoy at the end of your videos, like you always sign up with like, keep it up, you're awesome, and I'm like, yeah, thank you. It's a nice touch.
It was something that was on my first business card, not from ToolsonTech, but my original card that had like keep it, you're awesome, keep it up on the back end of it.
Yeah.
So anytime I gave somebody my visiting card, my business card, they go like, and then they flip it around and you see them smile. And I was like, yeah, that's
a cool touch. Yeah. But I mean, like, there's enough
yeah.
competition and one-upmanship and blah, 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 blah in the world just to be like, hey, man, thanks. You're doing a great job. Like, okay. The questions that I wanted to get to, the one was on end-to-end encryption, and for me it was about an article that I read the other day which speaks to the different models of encryption, which says initially like the paradigm for encryption was the firewall, which says like on our local premises we are going to keep everyone out, and that was like the way that we built firewalls and that we can't get in that internet traffic in and out. And I don't remember the terms that they used, but that was a different sort of encryption. And now that everything is cloud-based and web app-based, it's why we've moved to more of like a trust no one encryption. So it's like you need the key at both ends, in the sense of like the encryption key and then my internet connection. Sorry, just shout if that didn't come through.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine again. So.
Okay. So the key going out and then the key coming back in. So the idea is that like theoretically, because you're not in this firewalled environment, anyone could get it. So it's looking at like a completely open environment where it's like the viruses are assumed to be, or like the negative agents are assumed to be in the firewall already. So therefore there's trust no one. Why is it that companies are still so hesitant to use something which has trust no one encryption? It's more of a philosophical question, I guess, rather than like a Logseq specific question. I don't know if you have got any thoughts on that.
It's pretty obvious why they're hesitant, because for most web applications, their encryption is only between you and the application. So if I save something in Notion, it's fully encrypted from my end to Notion, but Notion needs to unencrypt it, read it, and put it in their database. Because when you use queries or other advanced functions on Notion, they need to query their database, get the data out, and send it to you. That is one of the reasons. And then because the data is stored somewhere, say if I store something with Notion and Notion keeps it in a USA server, that means that the US government can just come by and say like, I would like to read Mr. Golleman's data, and they can. That's how it is. They don't get an option. You don't get an opt-out. You don't fight that. Your data gets read. So you know that by definition. I know that for any set of data. And that means that that's why things like the GDPR say like, okay, you can do this, but it has to be in Europe to avoid that edge case. Then
that's terrifying.
Of course, like, it is terrifying. Like, oh my God, you don't want to know how the back end of the internet works. That's sometimes just horrible. But then we have zero trust, right? And I think you've probably saw that I switched away from LastPass to Bitwarden somewhere in the beginning of the year. I mean, that one went well. And that's because LastPass broke my trust. We had a zero trust relationship. That meant I would write my passwords. They would be fully encrypted and they wouldn't even know which file in their system belonged to me. That's how they originally sold me LastPass, because I did my due diligence when I started with it. And that changed over time. So that means that even if the government comes knocking and says like, hey, we want the files from Mr. Golleman, LastPass would go like, yeah, that's nice, but that's one of our 1 million encrypted hashes there. And we don't know which one until Mr. Golleman logs in, and even then we don't know it, because they were so paranoid that I think what happens is they would talk to me, and then I would get a hash and I would type my password, and then the combination of my username, password, and the hash they provided made like a unique idea. And I would give that to them, and they could go to like large database, go like, this is probably it. And then they give it to me, and then I can decrypt it. So they didn't even know which record in their database was from me. That's how it's supposed to work with real zero trust.
It doesn't Logseq have that. That's my question.
No, not at that level. Because Logseq has 2 passwords. So I encrypt my nodes locally, and then I give the encrypted nodes to Logseq with a name and password that's different from that encryption password, so that they know where to store it. But Logseq does know which record is from me. Like they know which is my personal database. This is not a huge deal, by the way. I mean, yes, people could get my data, but it would still be highly encrypted with the password only I know, and it's this long, so I don't worry about it too much.
But could the US government come knocking and say, hey, what's in Daria's database?
They could, and then they would get like an encrypted bundle with nothing. They couldn't do anything with it. But let's face it, if they really, really, really wanted your data, they would get that encrypted bundle and then just put a decryptor against it and let it run for a couple of weeks. Because, power.
Wow.
Because they would just try every possible password combination. So you better have a long password, because the only thing that doesn't have long passwords in my end is my D&D notes. So like, if the US government wants to know my secret notes for my latest D&D campaign, then you go ahead, dudes. Like, enjoy.
So it's so interesting. I watched a video the other day about like a big YouTuber, like millions of subscribers that got hacked. Yeah. And it was because they had their like each browser login apparently gets like a session code or whatever, and someone had logged or had somehow through some phishing scam got one of the employees to send them enough detail to get the browser login, and all the passwords are stored in the browser. And that's how they were like breaking into the channel. And I watched that, and I was like,
now if it good was it the cookie hack, the one that I've seen multiple YouTubers got called out with that one.
I don't know.
So like the passwords in your browser are locally encrypted, right? So you can't just read those. But the cookies they used to be text files. I hope they are better now. I haven't checked, but they probably are better, but they're still on your system. So what they do is they hack your system and then go to your browser directory, get that cookie file, and the cookies contain what is called a session key. And the session key is a single-use key.
Yes.
And the single-use key allows you to log in from any system. It's the thing that makes sure that if you close your laptop and you go somewhere else, you open your laptop, that YouTube is still logged in, because they go like, oh, that's your session key. And that session key can be invalidated. So if I would think that somebody would hack my system, the first thing you do is I go to Google and log out all my devices. That means all the session keys get nullified. And that means somebody has to re-log in with name, password, and two-factor authentication. Good luck with that, because two-factor authentication is like on a separate device. So you would have to steal my username, password, my phone. That's a tall order. But this cookie thing is pretty easy, technically speaking, because if you get that key, then you have like a window of a couple of days where you can log in, and with a bit of luck you can change someone's email address and then change their password. And once you change the passwords, it's like the first thing they do then is log out all sessions, and then they log in with their own password.
Wow. So I've moved all my passwords out the browser anyways. I was like, no, and I put it in LastPass, and now I'm like using LastPass religiously. It's like a little bit slower, like to find the website, log in, but I've just decided that it's worth the cost. Like if someone,
you should definitely. I don't trust the browser password managers at all.
Yeah,
they're nice. It's better than no password manager, but they're also the #1 target, right? Anybody that wants to do this, but your cookies are still at large. The only advice I can give there is that if you ever have an extension from someone that you don't know, is to don't open it if you're on Windows.
Jeez.
And have a good like virus scan, but even that doesn't help. That's why some of the bigger YouTubers got hacked, because they would expect their antivirus to go like, hey, this is bad stuff. For me, the best fix, if I have something that I don't fully trust, is then I open it on my laptop, because that one runs Linux, and the software that they built to run is made to run for an operating system. Because each operating system has its own way of executing code. So if they have something to execute code, then they will usually pick Windows, because that's the biggest target. So the only reason I'm safe there is not because Linux is safe by design, partially, but not in that regards, but because I'm not a big enough market. So then they just shoot at 500 people, and they don't care about that one weird dude running Linux.
Yeah, the next question I had was like on the plugins. So you spoke about like you're not downloading plugins from the Facebook Marketplace, from the Logseq Market. I'm trying to sell something on Facebook Marketplace. So from the Logseq Marketplace, where I can't sell
Yeah.
anything. And you're downloading them, and you yeah. So two questions there is like, are you building some sort of like trusted list that you are able to like give to people? Are you, and I guess the precursor to that question is, are you reading through the plugin code yourself as well before installing certain plugins?
There's a couple of things that I do. First of all, I take safety in numbers in the form of like, I usually pick like popular plugins, things that are already installed by a lot of people. Another one is that, of course, I know a lot of the plugin authors, either through Twitter or through using their code for a while. So that's also a safety measure in me. If it's like an obscure plugin, I would be careful. But for example, I have the interstitial journaling, the Control-T to fill in the time one. I don't worry about that one too much because it's from Alex, and I can like literally drive to his house and punch him if he's like.
Okay, so we'll cut back in plugin security.
Yeah, so a plugin security. So the part of that is numbers, and then of course like there's the skimming of the code. But I don't how do you say, I don't kid myself. Like I can skim code, but I don't read Clojure, for example. Like not very proficient. So usually what I do is I check like the last couple of commits. So I look like what kind of code changes were made, because then I get like a snapshot of like how code is built. But that's not 100% guarantee. Nothing is a real 100% guarantee except going fine comb through the whole thing, and then you can still miss it, because if they do put some malicious code in there, it's going to be well hidden.
It's going to be sneaky. It's not going to be like, hi, I'm the malicious code line comment block.
You'd be surprised though. Because I've had a couple of WordPress hacks, and those are really obvious because they just encrypt a whole bunch. So you can just look for the encryption key somewhere, and then it's.
So your website's, just to take a nice little detour here, you're still using WordPress?
Yes.
And for both your websites, or for, because I see, wait, I just googled Bas, and it's not giving me the one.
I've got a couple of websites, like I think Amendo is no longer, my corporate website is no longer using WordPress, because that one was basically static. So I said like, okay, just make a static website and be done with it.
Yeah.
But the ones that I change often, like the ToolsonTech one, I do use WordPress because I want to put my blog posts on there, and I want to be able to hook it into APIs and make.com and things like that.
Yeah, I see you're using Hugo for your personal, or for Amendo. That's, yeah. I love Hugo. Like Hugo is such a game changer.
Hugo is super nice.
Oh
yeah, and it's nice because now I don't worry about that one anymore. The Amendo one I don't have to update. It's static code. It goes through Netlify, I believe. So it's like runs, and I don't care about it. But the ToolsonTech one, I'm on that one often enough. So and I used to run hosting for WordPress websites, so I got some of the knowledge in the bag already.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not like a big cost for you to implement it. Because I mean, I was paying $31 a month for Ghost. And I just canned that. I was like, nah. I built everything onto Hugo. Took some effort, but I learned enough in the process to warrant it for my side. Yeah, and it was a good.
Yeah, and I think like for other people that I know that use WordPress, and at some point said like, yeah, I want lower hosting costs. I just said like, oh, well, just install a plugin for static WordPress, and then you just generate your whole WordPress site and upload it to Netlify. Then you run WordPress locally, and you just make a static copy that you upload to Netlify.
And you could probably even do that by Git. I mean, all the changes. Yeah, that's been the biggest thing for me. Is just like the updating text, commit, and then push.
Yeah, that's super nice.
So nice.
And that's and what I like with WordPress is then I can hang it up to make.com and other things. So I can automate the process of my business. I need to play around with it a bit. For example, the workshop, I want to be able to automatically say like, hey, the workshop is full, or these are the new dates. And I need to figure out like how to do that. Yeah. And I know that there's tricks I can do with WordPress to get that working. I just need to spend time, but I don't want to automate too much. I first want to see how the process goes by hand, and then start fully automating.
But that is the gospel in my perspective. It's just like, you need to be able to know what you're doing first by hand before you try and automate it. Because like, I think I worked in a company where the developers wanted to automate everything first and like didn't understand the workflows. And I was like, no, guys, we first have to understand how information is handed over and what all the different interactions are before we try and automate it. Because like the work to automate is weeks in that case. And we ended up not using code at all. Well, not code at all. We were using Django, and I was like, let's just build it on Airtable. And that was like, Airtable's my favorite thing. In terms of GDPR, is Airtable subject to the same? This is a tangent.
Yeah,
sorry.
they're all stuck to the same thing. Every cloud service has the same issue. And Dutch, like European regulations are painful, but good. Privacy is important. So yeah, if you want to do business in Europe, then you're a company that's above, I think, 100,000 euros. Then all these regulations suddenly come into effect, and then it's like.
The last one was like thinking about the publish feature, not the publish feature, that for the way that you're sharing your meeting notes, maybe just like the opportunity to use the Logseq export full graph or export like certain pages, and then putting that on GitHub, and like instead of sending the markdown file, because like my updates.logseqmastery.com is like literally an export of a graph that I just export, drag and drop, and I literally drag the HTML file across. I delete the original file, and it does all the GitHub changes, and like anyone can access that. I found that to be super useful, and like I wonder like what application that has in a corporate sense, because I'm working with someone who, well, a friend of mine. It's not that I'm doing any work with him specifically, but he does a lot of knowledge management for a big American company, and I've suggested to him to use this approach in the sense that he manages the information centrally and then like pushes it to everyone else via Netlify, hosted by GitHub. I don't know. Have you considered that, or what's the like? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like for now in practice, what we've seen is that because we don't share a lot of notes, just a couple of meeting notes, the quickest way for me is just to click the block for the meeting notes, do export, say like keep all the formatting from Logseq, and then I paste it in MS Teams chat as a source thing, because they can just copy that, paste it in Logseq, and they're done. We're swapping blocks instead of pages. So that's just because that's what works quickly in practice. Yeah. As for like larger things, the things that we discussed is like putting it in something like GitHub or Git repository, because that's more technical but still familiar, and we can easily resolve merge conflicts. And I'm still considering that because I'm doing the workshop, for example, and I want to be able to share the video and the Author AI links and stuff like that afterwards. On the moment, I'm still considering just doing that in Notion because it's easy and accessible to everyone, and I can make a link that's useful. But on the other end, I was thinking like, if I put it in something, because it's read only. So if I put it in my WordPress site as a page, that would work as well. And then at least like you don't need the Notion account, you don't need the Notion account to accept. Or Hugo, which would be nice as well, because you could automate it and say like, okay, what parts can I add to it? But I'm not 100% sure yet. I'll probably start with the Notion page because it's easy and I can refine the process. And then maybe with like a short URL shortener in front of it, so that if I want to change it to a WordPress site, all I need to do is like, okay, change the site, change the short URL, and then at least I know that the people that were at my workshop can still access the same data. Be a bit of a hassle in the beginning, but that way I can first see what kind of information do I want on it before I build something more permanent. Okay,
awesome. So to wrap up like the first part of the conversation, I guess more about your workshop details, where people can find it, how people can sign up, how much it costs, all of that, if you've got like whatever sort of context you can provide for that.
Yeah. So like for the workshop currently, the next one is on the 1st of May, which will be very short. I'll probably have another one after that, probably a month after. I need some time to process the results. The workshop will always be on my website, and it will also be findable by going to logseqworkshop.com, because I just registered all the domains that I could need for that. And that one will redirect to my website for the current workshop. Currently, it's 35 euros. I'm planning, that's like an introduction while I'm figuring out like, okay, what's the most value I can get. Once it gets up and going, I'll probably increase it to 50, but then the value will be higher as well, because then I hope to have like a more condensed, like the highlights that people actually wanted from it in it. Because this initial workshop is, of course, partially knowledge on my side and partially figuring out, like seeing if it's something that actually provides value to people, if people want it. And I, build in public a bit. So like get feedback from the people that are there, learn, adjust, and make it better, because that's the goal. But you need a couple of iterations. Nobody builds the perfect workshop in the first iteration. Anybody that says that does is lying. It's like,
yeah, I know. I mean, it's a lot of hard work. Thanks so much to Bas for coming onto the channel. I had put a pin in the recording so that we could separate it into two versions, one for enterprise and one just talking about Logseq. But Bas and I talked about a few personal things, so I decided to exclude that just to respect his privacy and mine. And I can really affirm that Bas knows what he's talking about and is super willing to help out. So go have a look at his workshop if that's something that interests you. And if you are interested in getting into Logseq and the basics of Logseq, well, also some more advanced stuff in the second part of the course, have a look at my course below, which goes into a structured approach into learning Logseq and implementing different workflows for yourself. Thank you so much.